Good day, and welcome to the next episode of
Just one thing.
Just One Thing is the podcast of Mindful Living Today, and you can also find us on Facebook at Mindful Couple and on Facebook groups where we would love you to join our supportive community there at Mindful Living Today with Lisa and Brad. And I remembered we are also on Instagram at The Mindful Couple.
Yep.
So we're on all those places, and we would love to have you join us for some uplifting messages, affirmations, some studies that talk about the ways that mindfulness can improve your life and all of those kinds of things that we're all about. Today's episode, which I'll jump into now, I am going to entitle, It's a Compassionate World. And it may be something that you would say, well, no, it's not. But Lisa and I were talking this morning about a book and a couple of articles she's read recently that we wanted to talk a little bit about. It is a compassionate world, and if you believed it's a compassionate world, how would that change, your view of everything?
Right.
So why don't you just take it away, Lisa, as I always say, and talk a little bit about the genesis or the background that sort of led you to
brought this topic up.
Want to talk about
I am
this.
reading. It is called The Art of Happiness.
The Art of Happiness. Okay.
I think that's what it's called, and it's by the Dalai Lama and a gentleman that's a doctor. Can't think of his first name. His last name is Cutler.
Cutler. Okay.
And he is a neuroscientist and also a psychiatrist.
Okay.
And I was just, in fact, I was mentioning to you, one of the things that I think makes this book interesting is that he has such a different perspective on compassion and human nature and that kind of stuff because of his psychology and psychiatry training.
Right.
So the Dalai Lama is his whole belief is that, first of all, we are meant to be happy.
Right.
And that we are all born compassionate beings.
Okay.
And immediately that is challenged by Dr. Cutler. He has a hard time believing that anybody is happy, so he's somewhat cynical.
Okay, well, and you were talking to me a little bit, if I can jump ahead.
Yeah, please do.
You were talking about the whole concept and the whole field of psychology and psychiatry.
Right.
Really is treating people who are ill.
Right.
They have mental illness.
And they're
they're
treating
depressed,
them as
they
illness.
have anxiety, they have psychoses. And so their goal is to bring people back out of sort of this depth of disease into sort of like neutrality.
It's not even neutral. The way he describes it is not even neutral. It's less suffering.
Less suffering. Okay.
You know what I mean? It's,
right. They don't really cure people. They just kind of make them suffer less. So there's really no overall aim to make people like happy or thrive or joyful.
Well, really, what I get from his perspective and the way he describes it is, I don't think he believes people can be happy.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you look at this perspective, and this may be, I know this is only one side of psychiatry and psychology, but if that is the underlying theme of people that are treating you, that their best goal is to get you to be less suffering, and it's not to move you to a place of happiness or well-being, the whole
emphasis and approach and what you're aiming at and how you measure improvement is very different. Absolutely.
Right. And so on that theme, he then explores this idea of compassion. And again, the Dalai Lama believes that we are all compassionate beings. And he does, he starts out saying that his beliefs are based in Buddhism.
Right.
However, there is, and the Dalai Lama is so well read and so well versed and has met with so many diverse individuals from so many different fields.
In the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a huge interest in the scientific community with, number one, positive psychology, but also taking these people who purport to be blissful and happy and joyous all the time, and they've, put them under all kinds of studies with electrodes on their brains and all kinds of stuff to measure is this really happening and what's going on and what makes these people feel happy.
Right. Well, and
some of the Dalai Lama's closest associates have been some of the most studied people in the world.
Right.
And some of them come out as like, this guy's just like blissful all the time. All of these
that area
I'll just
of
say
your
the
brain.
pleasure or reward centers are like lit up all the time.
Right. And you can tell going into this book as I'm getting into it. Initially, there's almost like this like, well, the Dalai Lama says he's happy all the time, but
I'm not
we
sure.
all know that's not really
the intonation or the writing is, I don't know.
Right. So anyway, so exploring this idea of compassion, what came about for me today was looking and observing my own beliefs about this idea of us being loving beings,
okay.
compassionate beings. And in my heart, I wanted to believe it, but there's so much anger and ugliness and, all that kind of stuff that's out there that we all see in the news, and sometimes we see it very personally in our own lives.
Many of us in our families, we've experienced, frustration and I'll just say abuse of one kind or another, whether it's verbal or psychological or
sexual,
or physical, whatever it is.
Right.
It kind of throttles that, any desire for compassion, happiness, kind of like pushes it either away from you, out of you, whatever, and you become a cynical person. You become somebody that metes out punishment and bad vibes and anger rather than approaching the world in a compassionate way.
Right. Right. And so looking at that, for me, this is only from my perspective, but for me, I had that feeling like I wanted it to be that kind of a world, but I didn't have anything to sink my teeth into. And so having read this chapter, or it's actually part of the chapter, but having read this, when you look at what the Dalai Lama uses to back up the statement that he makes, it becomes easier and more concrete to believe that it is the truth. That it is the truth that we are these innately compassionate beings, and he tells us to look at babies. And you were talking about babies.
And there's a lot of because people have shown increasing interest in positive psychology and these kinds of things. There's been a lot more done in the last decade with studies of babies in terms of innate altruism, desire to share, compassion and sympathy for people and their surroundings, and it just seems to be a natural part of most infants. And when you think about evolutionary psychology in terms of the attributes that a human being would need to sort of survive in a very hostile world when we're essentially primitives, very few tools, very few clothing, just sort of scavenging on the savannah or in the woodlands, being a cohesive unit and being able to work together to survive, to find food, to share, for warmth, to protect from predators. All of those things that make people want to work together, those are the things that are going to be selected for. If you're a selfish person, people are going to not want you in the group. They're going to push you out. Those genes are not going to be passed on. You're not going to survive. So when you look at the origins of humanity, hunter-gatherer societies that have evolved, you see a lot of cooperation. You see a lot of altruism. You see a lot of sharing. That's not to say
community building.
That's not to say that there aren't people who are competing for mates or whatever, and there's not some sort of a hierarchy. But overall, people are compassionate. They're inclusive. Everybody has a voice in the community. And all of those things that you sort of wished would be there. You often see those in hunter-gatherer type societies, although there are very few of those left to really study. But you're also seeing a lot of those attributes when they do baby studies, in terms of just a natural desire to comfort somebody who they see crying, to provide, to give somebody food when they have some and they see somebody else don't. And there's a lot of that goes into sort of establishing what are the natural inclinations of these babies and toddlers before they've really been changed by either a family, or society, whatever. Sort of what are their natural inclinations? And when you think about the survival of the species, those are the attributes, those compassionate attributes, those altruistic, those sharing, those cooperative attributes that led the humans to be able to survive, the Ice Age and sort of our early evolution as a dominant species. So, so it makes sense.
Yes.
But when you look at sort of the changes that have come about through, the advent of agriculture, the growth of hierarchical society, and then industrialization, there are other things that come into play that maybe sort of takes us away from, those natural attributes. And so we sort of, our society, maybe we've lost a lot of that. And although I think you probably inside of yourself feel those things that, you talked about. In many cases, it's hard to say and hard to believe. That humans are naturally altruistic and naturally helpful, and they're kind, and they want to do the things to help other people in humanity.
Well, I found that with the close of, and if I'd been smart, I would have brought the quote, the end of the last paragraph of that section with me. But it basically what he summarizes is that if we can believe in this idea that we are compassionate beings,
sure,
we naturally feel safer.
Oh yeah.
We feel more at ease.
You're more outgoing.
We're more outgoing.
You're kinder.
Right. All those things, and in the end, that raises your happiness level.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's a and what I found was when I read that, I felt such an opening is the only way I can describe it. Of like my body felt suddenly very soft, very relaxed, very open, and I was so comfortable with this idea in a way that I have never been before, because it suddenly was explained to me with science behind it, and it made sense.
Well, and I will admit, when I was coming out of graduate school, starting my career, I had kind of a cynical attitude towards people, and I thought, it was kind of competitive. I thought it was dog eat dog.
Right.
I wasn't very trustful of people out there in the world, but just sort of, I don't know whether it was accident or purposeful, but I just started to be more outgoing purposefully, because it's not my natural inclination, and smiling at people and just assuming that people sort of were going to be kind back to me. All of a sudden, of a sudden, I realized in 99% of the cases, if you smile at somebody, if you're nice to somebody, there's a natural reciprocation, and it just sort of you mirror each other, and sort of that natural desire to be friendly, to be kind. You can bring that out in people just by being that way, because the world reflects how you view other people,
and how you view them.
Not to say that you're not going to get figuratively smacked in the face once in a while, but if you're consistent with being outgoing, with being friendly, with being kind, that's what the world will reflect back to you, and you will just feel so much better. You'll feel happier inside, and you'll view the world as a better place. Absolutely, I guarantee it.
And that's what they were saying was with this whole idea, when you view the world and you view people as compassionate beings, then it changes your perception and how you deal with people.
Even if somebody's coming at you in a way that maybe seems aggressive or not that way, if you view them as innately compassionate,
absolutely,
you'll instead of being angry back, you'll think, now what's going on? What's bothering them? How can I help them? How can I help them find and get back to their true compassionate self? And you'll approach the whole world differently.
So it's really interesting, and to me, it allowed me to, I can imagine, I'm anxious to see how it would feel, but I can imagine in my mind having someone come at me now aggressively with anger, with whatever, some kind of a negative attitude, and having a separation there that gives me the opportunity not to respond in kind, to respond with compassion, to respond with love and kindness.
And I think sort of the mindfulness practices that you do every day allows you to sort of pause before you just immediately react, sort of by mirroring what they're doing. It allows you to pause, and now with this knowledge, you can say...
It felt like that little extra bump, it was like that...
I can pause, and now I can come back with like, oh, wow, I don't understand why you're so upset. It gives you a different way of, and we talked a little bit this morning too. I think there are some people, through whatever circumstance, that they're so far gone
that it may be hard.
They may never come back, and I'll just use the term, they just may be a nasty person,
lost,
and you're just not going to bring them back into their natural, compassionate being that they were born as. So the world has just like warped them, and they just may not come back.
But I think the number of people that are actually like that are few and far between.
I don't think there are as many as you think.
No, absolutely not. And so I think I believe, and I know from my own practice, that by viewing people as being loving, by viewing people as being kind, or at least wanting to be that version of themselves, whether they get it right or not, that it gives me the opportunity to interact with them in a kind of more compassionate way.
Another thing you can think of is think of all the people that are close around you, your family, your friends, and everything. You think they're probably pretty compassionate people for the most part. Well, everybody is part of some group like that, so everybody feels
everybody's got that group.
All those groups overlap, and so it really entails almost everybody. So if you start thinking that way, it's kind of eye-opening, and it's kind of, world shifting in terms of what goes on. So, it was very interesting and fun talking with you about this morning and deciding to talk about this with the audience. It's just a really interesting, different way of viewing the world, and I think it really moves you towards sort of that sustained happiness that is what we're striving for.
And I know a lot of people, they're going to say, are going to have a really hard time
with
this concept.
Because of their experience.
Right.
And so with that in mind, how would you start? What would be your just one thing to get going in terms of believing that it is a compassionate world?
I think surprisingly, and this may be the topic for the next time, I would start with affirmations.
Okay.
I would start with, this is a compassionate world.
That's a great way to start. Just a reminder of that. You keep that in the back of your head, and it gives you the pause to say, well, what's going on here? It doesn't feel compassionate, but it is. Right. What can I do to sort of move it in that direction?
Yeah.
And the affirmations is a good thing because I've had some recent experience with them that maybe we'll explore a little bit
another time.
Next time. So.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's a fascinating topic.
It's a great topic.
If you're more interested, I highly recommend reading that book.
It is a compassionate world.
Yes, it is a compassionate world.
And so until next time, this has been
Just One Thing.